Fix right here on 938. Now, a very good friend of the station, Paul Ho, Chief Mortgage Officer at iCompareLoan.com. In the house this morning, we are taking the temperature of the property market here in Singapore. Private, public, and commercial, all, every single one. Paul, welcome back into the program.
Thank you, Keith.
Let's talk about the recent rules, public housing. CPF rules have been, relaxed, and someone can buy a property with about, let's say, even 30 years left.
30 years to 59 years, that has always been allowed, right? Subject to the current guideline of the current lease plus remaining, and your current age must exceed 80 years old.
Sure.
And so on. So the only thing, there is a formula to calculate what is the CPF withdrawal limit based on the valuation limit. I know that sounds like a handful.
Right. That's right.
So just what is the valuation limit for HDB principally is that if you buy a place that is 100,000, for instance, okay, and your valuation limit is 80%, right? That means that by the time you withdraw $80,000 from your CPF, including the accrued interest that you have earned had you not taken out the money,
right, then
you have to stop using CPF. So in other words, if you have interest costs going on and so on, at certain stage you will, let's say, reach 95,000, 110,000 and so on, you would have to cough out cash for that purchase. So when that happens, what you will see is that you have to pay cash at the later years of your purchase of this HDB flat or an older HDB flat.
Right, indeed. In your opinion, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I would think it's not that good to modify the rules too much, to allow too much use of the CPF, because I think primarily the CPF should and primarily be used for healthcare, for retirement, right? Mm-hmm. So we now see that the CPF is being used up by property, by healthcare, and that leaves very little for retirement.
Indeed. But will there, do you think, be a market for property or public property, HDB flats, which are approaching, say, who have passed the 50-year limit? I mean, good favored districts will always be favored, but say if I were on the outskirts, on the periphery of things, would it be attractive enough? Again, price comes into play.
I think there are not that many peripheral HDB properties that that comes with remaining 60 years or 50 over years, right?
Sure.
So you will see that the outlying areas typically are newer HDB flats, right? You will see the older ones typically in mature estates,
okay,
right? So they are typically in mature estates.
So, but we've seen some form of rejuvenation. We've seen some, some SIRS, some blocks taken up, and new ones coming up, especially in Toa Payoh, and they're commanding a premium.
Yeah, the new ones definitely command a premium, right? So the older ones, I think, if people are looking to buy HDB, older HDB, there's nothing wrong with that. I think to buy to stay, you just have to consider it as utility value, right?
And look at us, and perhaps the age you have left, how much you anticipate you're going to live if you're buying something of 30 years.
Yeah, I think it's not just how much you can live also, because at the end of the day, you may be hit with a medical condition. You may have other needs for your children, your grandchildren, and at which stage you might consider to relocate, shift house. And that is when the problem occurs, because you are tied in and you have very little savings from your HDB flat, right, and you have nothing much you can do about it. And all your money is inside your CPF, and it's all tied up in your house. So if you have no other income options, that will become a really difficult situation.
Let's look at the private sector as well. If a lease has ticked down, if they are leasehold properties, would they be more marketable or not? Or is it, again, dependent on district and area?
if you have an older private property, it's really much depends on the district and area, and obviously due to utility value, that means
Sure.
the rundown of the value is not a straight line, linear rundown. It's actually a little bit like a curve, right? It's an arc shape. So at the earlier 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the rundown of the valuation is actually not that much. So towards the middle and the later part, the depreciation of that property becomes more pronounced, right? So you would have to have a much cheaper price for you to consider to buy such property.
Paul, before we talk about the commercial and the industrial parts of the property and how they are faring, let's talk about the fact that there have been. We talked about the oversupply recently. What about the fact that people are considering the shoebox units? How successful have these shoebox units been? There have been some limitations put on them as well.
Yeah, I think the limitations should be and have come too late, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should really restrict every single unit to 70 square meters, as opposed to an average of 70 square meters for an average overall condominium, right? Because when you allow it to have a mix and match, what you will see is that they will find the optimum, and the optimum might be a developer developing a lot of 500 square feet units, a lot of 550 square feet units, and then a number of those units who are like 800 plus 900
Sure.
square feet and so on, to meet that average. So what you're going to see is that over the whole curve, you will see that the price of every single segment typically optimize or go up. So that's not healthy for our living standard. Well, living cost definitely is going up, but living standards not.
When we talk about leasehold, older private units, with their leases ticking down, what if there is no en bloc potential involved? We've seen en bloc attempts again by places like Mandarin Gardens. Brattleview is the latest one.
Yep.
And the asking price in the $2 billion range. Are developers biting? Will they bite?
Really depends on how long the process will take, right? Because if you look at the entire en bloc process, it typically takes between 24 months to 40 months thereabouts, in that vicinity, from the point you form a collective sales committee to the time you complete the sale.
And you get the agreement of everybody involved.
Yes, and the whole process is included in that 40 months, right? So having said that, I think if the developer thinks that 40 months down the road, or 60 months down the road, there could be a market, then they could actually take this process with the approval process going slowly.
Sure.
Right, to buy this at this point in time. So the projection, whether they will take or not to take, will be to look at what is their purchase price on a per square foot per plot ratio basis.
Right.
Meaning that what is the gross floor area they can use? Are there any bonus gross floor area from different usage? Could be power, green, greenness of the building or whatever. You get some bonus for
what
that. Yeah.
Do developers take into account? Of course, it inevitably it will be maximizing the plot of land. With a place for $2 billion, what would I have to sell my completed project? So I'm just projecting and asking you to project for me.
It's not so much the land. I mean, the land. If you look at the land at $2 billion, you need to look at how much of square feet is that $2 billion, right? So you have to take into perspective how many units of those are being torn down. After they're torn down, let's say a land that is 100,000 square feet with a plot ratio of let's say 2. So you can actually build 200,000 square feet of space. Right, 200,000 square feet of space on a 1,000 square feet basis is like 200 units, right? So so then you say that if that is 200 units at $2 billion, that would be like $1 million a piece, right?
Right.
Is it? Oh no, that is like,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you need to scale that up to include the construction costs and so on.
Sure.
So, and you have to build in about 20% margin, right? Because there will be some margin of error and so on. So basically, I would say developers will build in 15 to 25% of margin. Yeah.
What happens if a leasehold property ticks down and there is again no en bloc, no nothing involved? What happens to the land and what happens to the buildings?
We haven't actually seen much of that
yet, right.
except for Geylang, Lorong 3, I believe,
Yes,
or Lorong 1.
yes.
Yeah, those houses, right?
Right.
But apart from that, technically speaking, the land reverts to the government.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes state land again.
And before we let you go, Paul, let's talk about the commercial property segment. You were talking about the fact that rents are still on the up and up, even in this kind of a market.
No, I don't think rents are on the up and up. I think commercial properties or B1 industrial properties in certain places where strong REITs are holding fort. What happens in those cases is that except for retail for very, very hot malls that are next to the MRTs, but a lot of the industrial areas may not have full occupancy rate. Right? They may have 80%, 85%, or some higher, some lower. So you see that is not the national average, could be lower, right? So, but they are not dropping their prices, but they would rather keep some of the prices elevated while leaving some of the units empty. So there is that kind of holding power in the marketplace that keeps the rental prices stable or not falling by much.
On that rather pessimistic note, Paul Ho, it's always a pleasure speaking with you, sir. Thank you so much for throwing so much light on the issue. We're taking the temperature of the property market here in Singapore this morning on the Breakfast Club. Private, public, and as well as commercial. And our very good friend Paul Ho was in the house, sharing his insights with us. You've been listening to the Breakfast Club on your morning fix right here on 938 Now. I'm Keith D'Souza. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Very nice, sir.